Hello, Algebra students, and welcome to Lesson 8.5 on how to solve quadratic equations by using inverse operations. Now, we've used inverse operations before. We've actually been using them probably since middle school. Inverse operations is just a fancy way of saying that you have to use the backwards order of operations. Do you remember that the order of operations is, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, PEMDAS? Well, inverse operations is the order of operations, but backwards. The word inverse means backwards. So SADMEP includes subtraction and addition. So it means you're going to cancel any subtraction or addition first, then any multiplication or division, then any exponents, and finally any parentheses, anything in parentheses. So that's the order we're going to cancel things. Now, we've already learned how to solve quadratic equations by factoring. Inverse operations, aka SADMEP, can only be used if the quadratic term is missing. So do you remember that if you write something in standard form, the linear term would be the bx with x to the first power. So if you don't see a linear term, no linear term, then we can use SADMEP. Now, if your quadratic is written in vertex form looks like this. So if you see parentheses of a binomial that's quadratic, that's squared, so anytime you see a binomial squared with either numbers added or subtracted or numbers multiplied in front, but if you see a binomial squared in parentheses, that's called vertex form. Vertex form allows you to use SADMEP as well. So it's super, super important that you guys understand that SADMEP can only be used if there's no linear term in your quadratic when it's written in standard form. Okay, so quick reminders, this is standard form when it's ax squared plus bx plus c. So if the linear term is missing, you can use SADMEP, and this is called vertex form, when you have a binomial quantity in parentheses squared. Now, do you guys know what the inverse of an exponent is? Remember, an inverse cancels something. So the inverse of addition is subtraction. The inverse of multiplication is division. The inverse of an exponent is a root. Okay, go ahead and pause the video. Make sure you have everything written down that I have written so far. Since we'll be solving quadratic equations that have an exponent of 2, we're going to be using square roots. If you had a problem that had an exponent of 3, then you would be using a cube root to cancel it. So for this lesson, we're going to be using square roots. Take a minute and draw the box that I have on the screen. Pause the video if you need to, but make sure you write everything down. In previous math classes, you should have solved basic quadratic equations, and I'm going to give you an example of what happens when you solve a quadratic equation as simple as x squared equals 4. This is asking me what number times itself twice, so what number to the second power equals 4? Can you think of the answer? What number to the second power is 4? If you guessed the answer 2, you are correct, because 2 squared equals 4. So if I replace the x with a 2, I get 4. But there is also another answer. X can also be negative 2 because negative 2 quantity squared is also 4. So technically, when you square root a positive number, which is what we're going to do today, so when you have an x squared equals a number, you can square root both sides. The square root cancels the squared, and the square root of 4, that's a positive number. The square root of 4 has two solutions, positive 2 and negative 2, which instead of writing them both separately, we're going to write them like this, x equals plus or minus 2. Now let's take a look at this equation. X squared equals 0. What number to the second power is 0? Or what number times itself equals 0? Take a minute and try to figure it out. If you said 0, you are correct. Because if you replace x with 0, 0 squared equals 0. Is that the only number that when you square it gives you 0? Yep. So anytime you square root 0, so remember, we're going to be solving using inverse operations. The inverse of an exponent of 2 is a square root. So I would square root both sides to get rid of the exponent. When I square root 0, it's just going to be one solution, 0. 0 is the only number multiplied with itself that will give you 0. Now let's say we had something like this, x squared equals 4. What number times itself twice gives you negative 4? What number times itself 2 times gives you negative 4? Let's try 2. Does 2 times 2 equal negative 4? Nope. What about negative 2 times negative 2? Does that equal negative 4? Nope. So this one has no solution. There is no number that you could ever multiply with itself to give you negative 4, because when you multiply two numbers together, even if they're negative, they'll never come out negative. So this is no real solution. So in the problems, when we square root both sides to get rid of the squared, and you're square rooting a negative, you have to know that there's no real solution to that problem. Go ahead and pause the video to make sure that you're writing everything down. Okay, our directions say solve each quadratic by factoring or using inverse operation. You have to choose the correct method. Choose correct method. So I'm not going to tell you which one to use for which problem. You have to figure out which method is better, factoring or inverse operations, aka, remember, inverse operations is SADMEP, the backwards order of operations. Okay. Take a minute to write down these instructions. Solve each quadratic by factoring or using inverse operations. Remind yourself that SADMEP is what inverse operations is referring to, and that it is super important that you choose the correct method. I'm not going to tell you which one is the one you're supposed to use. Okay. Remember what we talked about previously. SADMEP, inverse operations, can be used to solve a quadratic if there is no linear term, or if your problem is written in vertex form. As I look at number 1, I notice that it has no linear term. It has a quadratic term and a constant term. So that means that I can use SADMEP to solve it. So first I'm going to cancel any addition or subtraction. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel the 36. Since it's subtraction, I'm going to use addition. 0 plus 36 is 36. Then I'm going to cancel any multiplication or division. The 6 is being multiplied with the x squared, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel that multiplication with division. 6 divided by 6 is 1. You get x squared equals 36 divided by 6 is 6. So slowly, little by little, I'm canceling using StatMap. Now I'm on the e, which is an exponent. How do you cancel an exponent of 2? You use a square root. Now 1 times x squared is just x squared, so I hope you guys see that. If you have an exponent of 2, if it's a squared, you're going to use a square root to cancel it. And what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. The square root cancels the squared, and you're left with just x. Now, because the 6 is a positive number, you're going to have two solutions. Now, when you square root 6, you'll see that you get a decimal. Take a minute and take the square root of 6 on your calculator. Write the first 3 numbers after the decimal. We need to round that answer. Now, I didn't leave myself enough space. There's going to be two solutions, a positive and a negative. So you can write them separately or you can put them together. You can write them like this. Now, please try to round your decimals to the second decimal. So this is 44. The third number is bigger than 5. Remember that if you have 5 or more, you raise the score. So your solution here is actually 2 answers, plus or minus 2.45, because it was 44, but the 9 rounds up to 45. So again, quick reminder, if you square root a positive number, you need to put plus or minus in your solution, because there are 2 answers. Okay, next problem. Remember, you can pause the video, rewind, fast forward through anything if you need to. In the next problem, I noticed that, again, there's no linear term. So that means I can use StatMap. So I'm going to check if there's any addition or subtraction first. I see addition, so I'm going to go ahead and subtract. Now remember, your goal when you're using StatMap is to get the variable by itself. So always focus on the variable. When you're using StatMap, you want to get that variable by itself. When we were factoring, we wanted all the terms on the same side of the equal sign. So we moved everything to one side and got 0 on the other. You do not need to do that when you're using StatMap. And you use StatMap if there's no linear term. Okay, so I canceled subtraction and addition. Now I'm going to go ahead and cancel multiplication with division. 3 divided by 3 is 1. You get m squared equals negative 25. I am now ready to cancel the exponent. Since it's an exponent of a squared, I can square root. Remember to do it to both sides. The square root of m squared is just m. Because the 25 is negative, there is no real solution. You can even try square rooting it on your calculator, square root of negative 25, and it'll say error or cannot do it. So this is no real solution. There is no number that when you square it will give you negative 25. As I look at example 3, I notice that again it has no linear term. That means I can use StatMap. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel. Remember, you're trying to get the variable by itself. So in all of these, my goal was to get the variable by itself. That was different than factoring, because in factoring we wanted all the variables and numbers on the same side together with an equal to 0 on the other. So as I look over here, I see subtraction, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. I end up with 0. And I'm going to keep going. Look where your variable is. So I got rid of the subtraction and addition. Now I'm going to get rid of the multiplication. I'm going to use the reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 6/5. This will give you 1w squared. Before you square root, you always want to make sure you have a 1w squared, or 1x squared. Okay, 6/5 times 0 is 0. Now that I have a 1w squared, I'm ready to get rid of the exponent. Remember, I'm following SADMAP, so now I'm ready to get rid of the exponent. A squared is canceled with a square root. When you square root 0, you're only going to have one solution. Do you remember what that solution is? 0. Remember that a square root cancels a squared. When you square root 0, there's only one solution. So quick reminders. When you square root a positive number, you're going to have two solutions. If you square root a negative number, you're going to have no real solutions. And if you square root 0, you just have one answer of 0. Feel free to pause the video, rewind, do whatever you need to do to make sure you're understanding this. Try the next problem by yourselves. Notice that I can use SADMAP because there's no linear term. I see a quadratic term and a constant term. So look for subtraction and addition, multiplication or division, exponents. So far we haven't had any parentheses in any of the problems, so I didn't have to worry about the P. But in a few days we will have some problems that have parentheses, and we'll deal with those then. So take a minute, check to see if you can do this one on your own. Pause the video now and push play when you're ready to check your answer. Okay, I got an answer of positive 8 and negative 8. You can write them separately. So look over here. You can write them separately, or you can put plus or minus 8. The first thing I did is I canceled the negative 5 because that counts as subtraction. So I added 5 to both sides. Remember, your focus is to get the variable by itself when you're using SADMAP. I then canceled the 1/2 with the reciprocal to both sides. The reciprocal was 2 over 1, so I multiplied by 2 over 1. As soon as I had a 1x squared, I was ready to square root it. The square root cancels the squared. And when you square root a positive number, you have two solutions. Remember, that's because your original problem asked you what number squared is 64. You can have 8 squared be 64, and you can have negative 8 squared be 64, because negative 8 times negative 8 is 64. Okay, go ahead and pause the video and fix your answer if you need to. Okay, go ahead and write down example 5 and pause the video. Unpause the video when you're ready to start doing the problem. As you look at example 5, notice that it has linear terms on both sides of the equal sign. That means we cannot use SADMAP. So we're going to try to see if maybe factoring works, because that's the only other way that we've learned to solve quadratics. Now when you're factoring, you need to make sure that all your terms are on one side and 0 is on the other. Sometimes the 0 is on the left, sometimes the 0 is on the right. That depends on your quadratic term. If it's already positive, leave it there and move everything to the left side. If I had two quadratic terms, I would move the smaller one. I'm going to take a minute and move all the terms to the left side, making sure that I combine like terms. So the negative 11x becomes plus 11x, and I combine it with the 2x. That would give me 13x. Bring down the negative 12. That is a constant term. There is no constant term on this side. Technically it's 0, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I don't combine the 12 with the 13. I have to keep it separate. And now that I have 0, I can try to factor. This is a quadratic trinomial, so I'm going to try to see if I can find two numbers that multiply to 12 and add to 13. I can use the shortcut since the first number is a 1. From the factors of 12, is there a pair that I can use that will add to 13 and multiply to 12? Yes, 1 and 12. So this factors to x plus 1 and x plus 12. Then I'm going to set each one of these equal to 0 and solve. What are your solutions? If you said -1 and -12, you are correct. So since this problem had a linear term, I could not use inverse operations or SADMAP. I had to try factoring. Okay, take a look at the next one. Does that have a linear term? Yes. If there is a linear term, you want to combine all the terms on one side and set it equal to 0, the quadratic. So I'm going to go ahead and notice that I have quadratics on both sides. If you have quadratics on both sides, you cancel the smaller one. 4 is smaller than 5, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. That gives me x squared minus 2x plus 8 equals 0. Oops, not yet. Still got this guy, the negative 2x. And I cancel the negative 2x with a positive 2x. And I didn't mean to, but look, the linear term canceled on both sides. So since there is no linear term, that means we can use SADMAP. I don't have to factor. SADMAP requires me to cancel addition and subtraction, then multiplication or division, which there is nothing multiplied or divided with the x squared. So there was no multiplication or division. I did the addition and subtraction. Now I got to check for the exponent. It's an exponent of 2, so I'm going to square root. And since I'm square rooting a negative, that means there is no real solution. One thing that I recommend, guys, is to watch the video and watch me explain the problem without you writing anything at all. And then replay the problem, so rewind it and play the problem again, and then write it on your paper. That might help. So listen to me explain it first, and then watch the video again and try it on your paper. Okay. I see there's a linear term in the next example. I see that I have quadratics on both sides. Remember what I said, if you have quadratics on both sides, you're going to cancel the smaller one, the smaller coefficient. 3 is smaller than 8. 8x squared minus 3x squared is 5x squared. One more step to get that 0 that we need, and take a look at what happens again. We have 0 on one side, which is good, but the linear term canceled on both sides. So that means that I can use SADMAP. Okay, I'm going to cancel addition and subtraction first. Now remember, when you're doing SADMAP, you don't want the 0 there anymore. You're moving all the terms little by little so that you get the x by itself. I did the addition and subtraction. Now I'm on to multiplication or division. I'm going to go ahead and cancel the multiplication with division. And as soon as you have a 1x squared, you can go ahead and cancel the exponent. You have an exponent of 2, so you're going to use a square root. The square root cancels the squared. And because 2 is positive, we're going to have two solutions. Square root of 2, if you put that in your calculator, go ahead and put that in your calculator. Remember, you get two solutions. So I'm going to put plus or minus 1.414, etc. So put the three numbers behind the decimal. You're at a 41 right now. If the third number is 4 or less, you're going to let it rest at 1.41. So x is approximately, and technically, guys, whenever you round an answer, you should be using the squiggly equal sign. Do you guys remember that? That's when you round an answer, so you're saying it's approximately 1.41. So I'm thinking back to that first example that we did when we square rooted 6. We should have used a squiggly equal sign here. Squiggly equal sign plus or minus 2.45. So if you run an answer, please put a squiggly. All right, guys, if you need help, please make sure you contact me, and we can either Google chat or I can help you through Remind and give you some hints. But it is really important that you guys keep learning this material because you will need it in classes that you'll take next year and the year after. All right, guys, have a good day. See you soon.